Welcome to Unit 5, everyone. In this unit, we're going to be looking at poverty. This unit starts the second section, really, of the 8 modules that we're going to have. So let's proceed. In understanding poverty, we have to understand a concept that is known as social class or social stratification. This diagram that you're seeing here contains the hierarchy of classes in terms of stratification, and this was highlighted by Karl Marx. He did a lot of work on the class system a long time ago, and we still sort of use his model even today. So we see that this pyramid contains the basic classes that we have in many societies today, certainly in a lot of Caribbean societies. So we see right at the top, you have the upper class, then you have the section in the middle that contains the upper middle class and the middle class, and then you have the section at the bottom, which is usually referred to as the lower class. It contains both the working class and the poor. Poverty is related to social class in many different ways. But some of the things that we need to highlight is that social class has both an objective and a subjective dimension, meaning that a social class really has the physical structure in terms of how one class is different from another, how one class has more income or more power than another. So those are more objective things, right? But you also have the subjective dimension in that it really has to do with how one class relates to another, how people in a certain class feel about being in that class, and how they treat others that may not be in that class. And the subjective dimension is one that comes sort of culturally, one that we as a society tend to perpetuate. And this is the one that is a bit stronger in the end. There's not only social stratification in terms of the classes, but you also have stratification in terms of countries. Now, in terms of the world, you can see that we have developed nations, or what we call first world or industrialized nations. And on the other hand, you have countries that are considered to be developing or third world countries. And let me just note here that in the Caribbean context, the poorest country is that of Haiti, and from I think 2015, Barbados was considered first world in their status. But that, as I said before, is both objective and subjective. There are different explanations of poverty, and all explanations, as we will do in this unit, really would fall under one or two categories. You either have structural explanations of poverty or cultural explanations of poverty. Now, as it relates to the perspectives, the major sociological perspectives that we would have done, we would see that the structural explanations of poverty are really what the functionalist and conflict perspectives would have highlighted. versus the cultural explanations of poverty would be that of the interactionist perspective. The structural explanations of poverty would highlight the following. Number one, it says that you have issues with poverty because you have large corporations or large markets that would affect the country or large populations. So, like for example, you may have had a lot of people owning farms, and they would be working on the farms and feeding their families and taking care of their basic needs and even wants, right? But then you have these large corporations that may come into being, and as a result they would create machines, they would do advancements in how getting to know how to do things faster and with less people, because then you would have to pay less people. Not only that, they may choose to go to places where labor is actually cheaper. So, like for example, we have the made in China sort of phenomenon that is very acute to the 21st century, because practically every item that you have, a household item, you would see that it was made in China or one of those Asian countries. And that, on a structural level, would affect people becoming poor, because now you have persons who may be in that country, but their services are no longer needed because they require a higher wage when you could get it cheaper somewhere else. The second explanation in terms of structural explanations is that there are shifts in growth in a country. Sometimes a country might experience a boom, and sometimes it might experience a recession. And when these shifts happen in the economy, it definitely affects the poverty level of a country. And finally, structural explanations of poverty say that government aids, though they may have good intentions, actually indirectly produce poverty, because it encourages people to sort of depend on the system, and when they depend on the system now has to produce more to take care of these people. And the cultural explanations of poverty simply says, basically come under one thing. They say that there is a culture of poverty that people are socialized into. So, especially when you have people who have been poor for a very long time. So for generation upon generation, they would be experiencing poverty, and so they have a specific way of thinking and way of behaving that sort of perpetuates this type of poverty. Though this is an explanation that is brought forward by the interactions perspective, there are many researchers that disagree with this concept, claiming that we can't just lump every poor person into this category, saying that they are socialized into being poor and they have bad ideals and attitudes, because this is way too simplistic of a model, and it does not explain every case in poverty. There are aspects that are associated with poverty. So when you see people who are poor, usually you will see these other things as well. So these are concomitants of poverty. You have a huge one, healthcare. You also have education, prejudice and discrimination, housing, and homelessness. The poor are notorious for not getting healthcare at all, probably, or if they do get it, receiving very bad health care. And So it is with education as well. A lot of African countries, for example, they have very poor education systems. Sometimes they don't even have classrooms. You know, they have to sit outside in order for certain neighborhoods to get education, especially for younger children. You also have the poor experience, more increased levels of prejudice and discrimination, sometimes simply based on the way that they look. Sometimes they may look dirty, their sanitation might be poor, so they might smell, and people might treat them badly because of that. And of course, we know based on one of the previous modules that we did in exactly what we mean when we say prejudice and discrimination. Remember, prejudice has to do more with attitude, and discrimination has to do with behavior. And then finally, housing and homelessness. Poor people tend to experience a lot of shifts in housing a lot. Sometimes they're constantly moving around because they can't seem to pay the rent. And also, if there is a really heavy shift in terms of the economy, they can experience homelessness. Entire families, as a matter of fact, can experience homelessness. And what about poverty in the Caribbean? Um, where do we fit in this larger picture of poverty? Now, I highlighted before that Haiti is considered one of the poorest countries in the world, and it is a Caribbean country. Though it may not be English speaking, but the Caribbean is made up of countries that are not English speaking as well. But according to the United Nations, poverty in the Caribbean was actually almost cut in half between the years 2000 and 2014. Now, it moved from 25.5% to 10.8%. However, there are still some challenges, particularly there are challenges in terms of healthcare, sanitation, and even internet access. Now, some of you may say, well, this is not really a need, and this is not really an issue in terms of assessing real poverty. But internet access is important because of the way it is related to opportunities that people may find available to themselves. So without the internet, you would find that people tend to have less opportunities for upward mobility within the social stratification system, and especially within education as well. There is a program that comes from the United Nations. It's the United Nations Development Program, and this program targets poverty reduction in many Caribbean countries. And in most English-speaking Caribbean countries, you would find that they are doing different things in terms of this specific program in order to reduce poverty, right? Many of the social policies that we have in reducing poverty include some form of government aid. Now, the assignment that you have for this module, you would go a little bit more into that, so you'll have to do some research into exactly what type of social policies you would find in a particular Caribbean country. And as I said before, this unit is pretty succinct, and there you have it. So that's poverty as a social problem.